Welcome to Emirates, and on behalf of everyone at the airline, I truly hope you're having a smashing flight today. Thank you also for tuning here to the LitFest channel, where we meet some of the authors who appeared at the latest Emirates Festival of Literature held back in Dubai in February. Now, my next guest is not a full-time author. In fact, he's a cameraman, in particular a wildlife cameraman, who's made many of those amazing documentaries hosted by Sir David Attenborough. Shows like Blue Planet and Planet Earth, which are often shown here on board on our ice system. His name is Gavin Thurston. So Gavin, welcome to Dubai and welcome to the LitFest. This is the book. It's called Journeys in the Wild, The Secret Life of a Cameraman. Is it your first book?
It is my first book, yes. It was quite a struggle to write it, actually. I'm not a natural writer. But yeah, no, I'm very pleased now it's done and very proud of it, actually.
What prompted you, what tempted you to write it in the first place?
It's one of those things. Obviously, I've had an amazing career in terms of the experiences I've seen and the countries I've been to. And, you know, you'd sit down for a dinner party or something and you'd tell a story about being, you know, charged by an elephant or chased by lions or something. And the number of people over the years who'd say, God, Gavin, that's an amazing, you should write a book. And people said it over and over again. And so about 13 or 14 years ago, I actually started to write a book. But my writing back then was appalling. It was, I'd get all enthusiastic and I'd type away, and then half an hour later I'd get a coffee and read what I'd written, and it said, and then I went to Africa. It was hot. I liked it a lot. And I kind of, you know, it was like a 4-year-old essay. No, it kind of put me off. Yeah. And every time I saw David Attenborough on a shoot, the first thing he'd say to me, he'd say, Gavin, my dear boy, how are you? And how's that book coming on? And David said to me, 10 or 11 years ago, he said, right, he said, if you get that book finished while I'm still around, he said, I'll write you a foreword. And that still wasn't incentive enough for me to actually get it finished until a publisher got in touch with me, Orion Books, 2 years ago now, and said, have you thought about writing a book? And signed on the line, and the rest is history.
And David was true to his word. He wrote the foreword.
Yeah, very kind. I mean, I wrote to him and I said, look, I know it was 10 years ago you said you'd write a foreword, and I totally understand if you don't want to do it. And he wrote this wonderful letter back by return of post saying, dear Gavin, a promise is a promise. As a whole, I won't write for, forwards for books because I get so many requests, but a promise is a promise. And no, he wrote that marvellous foreword. And that's probably the main reason people are buying it, let's be honest.
Oh, come on now, come on. You're very modest. It's a wonderful book. I really enjoyed reading it. And a quick question about Sir David, because his programmes are featured here on Emirates for many years, and his programmes are shown around the world. You are responsible for filming a lot of the material that goes into those programmes. So how long have you actually been working with David Attenborough?
Well, I've been doing this job an awfully long time now. I've been doing it 37 years, and 32 of those I've been working with David and on his series. And as you know, I mean, it's a huge team of cameramen and women who work on it, so I shouldn't take all the credit for, obviously the best bits of mine. No, I shouldn't take all the credit for the camera work and so on, but yeah, 32 years working with David.
Gosh, and they really have made a huge impact, haven't they, in terms of the message that he's now trying to get across. In fact, many people are trying to get across that we need to take more care of our planet.
We do. I mean, it was an interesting thought of David's that, he says, why on earth are we spending all this money on, sending rockets to Mars and the idea of colonizing Mars? Surely we should just look after the planet we live on. And, we've evolved over tens of thousands of years as humans, and we evolved alongside nature, and it seems that only in the last sort of 200 years or so we've been kind of excluding nature, pushing it out, overrunning it, taking over habitat. It's a finite sized world, and we already have a lot of people on it, and we're already taking too much.
Now, I've often watched wildlife programs, and I'm sitting there thinking, how on earth did they manage that shot? My goodness me, how did they achieve that? Of late, quite often at the end of a program now, there's a little 10-minute section or 10-minute segment where they reveal a few of the secrets about how they did achieve that shot. How has that come about?
I think it was about 15 or so years ago. So basically a lot of the BBC programs were co-produced with American producers. Now the Americans, of course, have adverts on their TV channels. So they actually only want a 48-minute program, and then they've got 12 minutes of adverts to pad out the hour. So the programs were only funded to 48 minutes, and then the BBC thought, oh, well, what do we do with the other 12 minutes? You know, how do we fill that out? You know, we can't actually afford to make it to the same standard without co-production. So they came up with this format of the behind-the-scenes films, which actually are hugely popular, but it came about, you know, more of a finance thing, a saving thing, but it's stuck ever since.
So every time you film now, you have to remember to do these little cameos to camera and say, oh my goodness, that was a brilliant shot.
I know. No, I mean, it's really fun. They say I've got a good face for radio, so I try and keep out of those things now. But yeah, it's actually another workload, because it's not like you have a separate crew coming along. And generally the best bits, you're actually busy filming. So when some mishap happens or whatever, you know, haven't necessarily got the camera. So although they might be engaging and interesting, those behind the scenes things, there's an awful lot that you won't see in those because we're too busy filming the main program.
Now this interview is going out on Emirates, so our audience today are passengers, they're people flying on Emirates around their 150 or so destinations. But you, I mean, gosh, you must be one of the most well-travelled men on this planet. Is there anywhere that you haven't been to?
There's a lot of South America I haven't seen, and bits of Southeast Asia. I mean, that whole travel thing now, it used to be kind of a badge of honour that you've travelled and seen all these amazing places, but actually in recent years it's almost shameful that I've got so many air miles under my belt. And in fact now I'm now trying to do things to combat my carbon footprint. So if I fly, I will actually plant trees at home. I plant acorns, and it's quite satisfying sticking those around. I drive an electric car. I have solar panels on the roof. No, so I'm very aware that although it's been an amazing career and I'm still travelling and flying, I'm trying to offset that massive carbon footprint.
What are some of the challenges when you're flying around with all this kit? Because everywhere you go, you've got boxes of cameras and paraphernalia. I mean, I just breeze through customs and passport control with a briefcase. But, yeah. I mean, you must have had some pretty hairy experiences along the way.
It is quite, it ruins a good holiday having to take sort of like, well, I've just come back from Antarctica literally last week, filming for Frozen Planet 2, another David Attenborough series. And there we had 48 cases. I mean, it was a long shoot. I mean, between the different teams, we were down there maybe 4 months. We had 1,000 kilograms of excess baggage. You know, it's drones and dive kit and cameras and gimbals and lenses and you name it. Yeah, so it's an embarrassing amount of stuff. But I don't know, you kind of just muscle on. You get maybe 8 trolleys at the airport instead of 1. It's just part of the job, really.
So when you arrive at your destination and you've struggled to find one baggage trolley, prop your bag on it, just spare a thought for Gavin and his team.
Yes, no apologies to anybody who hasn't got a trolley when they've arrived.
Yeah. Now, let's go back to the early days of wildlife filming. Now, I can remember watching wildlife programs, not only with David Attenborough, Zoo Quest, but I can remember Armand and Michaela Dennis in Africa. And it was all black and white. It was shot on presumably 16mm film. Nowadays, the quality of the shots you're getting is just astonishing. How's the technology changed and to enable us to get this brilliant footage?
Well, I'm old enough to have started on film, and in fact the first camera I used was a Clockwork Bolex. You used to put a 100-foot roll in there, you'd wind it up, and when you push the trigger you would get 28 seconds of running time, and then you'd have to wind it up again. You know, so I think it really focused your mind on the behaviour you were filming. So if it was a bird taking off from a branch, if you push that button too early, you'd either run out of, you know, clockwork energy, or if you pushed it too many times, misjudging the bird taking off, you would run out of film and then you'd spend 2 minutes reloading. Whereas now we have cameras which you can put, you know, a terabyte card in there and it'll run for 6 hours. You can hot swap the batteries. I think just in the last 5 years, the video cameras now, the quality has surpassed what was possible with film. The convenience of it, you can change the sensitivity, the cleanliness of the pictures. You know, with film, if you have a fast ISO film, you'd always get noise in the pictures. Whereas with the video cameras now, I mean, this interview, funnily enough, is being shot on a camera that can shoot by moonlight. So it's actually opened up possibilities for filming new behaviours and things. So it's great being a cameraman, because now we've got these new toys, new technologies, and it's opening the world further to the audience.
And then, of course, there were drones.
Yes.
Opens up all sorts of possibilities.
It does. I mean, aerials used to be the luxury of high-end natural history, but now with the advent of drones, I think perhaps they're being slightly overused at the moment, but I'm sure that'll calm down. But it does mean it literally comes in one case that weighs 20 kilos, and you can get cinema quality images of whales in the ocean and so on. Things you actually wouldn't have been possible to do even with a helicopter because of rotor wash and close proximity and scaring animals. But some of the drones we use now literally are this size, and if once they're 30 meters away, they're virtually silent. So it has opened up a whole new sort of avenue of filming, I suppose, and a new viewpoint on the world.
You said you'd just come back, was it Antarctica you've come back from? You've just come back from Antarctica. Were you using drones out there to get some shots?
Yes, I mean, actually, I was talking about carbon footprint. I was doing predominantly the helicopter aerials for the Antarctic program. So we had a gyro-stabilized camera system on the front of the helicopter for that. But for the lower level stuff, and particularly for the stuff close to animals, penguin colonies and so on, then we did have 2 different drones for that. And I mean, they do give, filming the orca, for instance. There are pods of orca coming in amongst the ice. And the imagery now you can get by following them with a drone, and they're not in the least bit put off. I think they don't even know it's there. It's, it's far enough away and quiet enough. So I mean, it's a fun viewpoint to be able to share with the rest of the world.
Are the poles, the Arctic and the Antarctica, are they the most inhospitable places you filmed, do you think?
Yes, I mean, I never really paid attention in geography at school, because I remember the first time I went to the North Pole, that was actually also with Sir David, and that was for Frozen Planet 1, the first series. And I remember we basically camped 60 miles from the North Pole, and we had to fly in the last bit. But I remember lying in the tent. We shared a big tent. It was me, David, there was like 7 of us in the tent. And I just had my GPS with me. And I remember looking at my GPS, and we were doing 3 knots. And I was thinking, hang on a minute, how are we doing that in a tent? And of course, then it dawns on you, what your geography teacher taught you, is that you are actually on a frozen ocean, and this ice is drifting on the ocean. And yet Antarctica, as I realised when you get down there, is a continent, and it is mountains, and the South Pole actually is at 3,000 metres, 9,000 feet. And it is pretty, I'd say Antarctica, once you get to the interior, it is very inhospitable. I mean, without the right clothing, without the right shelter,
you wouldn't last long.
No, I mean, if you were dressed like this, you might last half an hour. You'd be unconscious and asleep. But it's beautiful. It's like the desert here in, once you get out into the desert outside Dubai, there's something beautiful about its simplicity and its emptiness. And you can see why there's a kind of religious draw here. I mean, for me, I'm not religious, but I can understand how just being in that habitat is a spiritual thing. And I get a kind of spirituality from nature. And the same at Antarctica, it was the same. It was just beautiful, pristine, simple, white. No, it's an amazing place, but you wouldn't survive long without the right kit.
Well, climate's one thing, but of course a lot of your filming takes place in front of some potentially quite dangerous animals. I mean, looking at hippos, crocs, lions, presumably snakes and spiders. What's been the closest encounter you've had with a really dangerous creature?
It's an interesting question. Lots of people ask me about the dangers of wildlife, and obviously I've covered a few of the stories in my book. But weirdly, for me, the most dangerous animal on this planet is the human being. There's nothing more frightening than a 14-year-old African boy, conscript, with an AK-47, with no, well, I mean, scared for their own life, but they've got a sort of single answer, which is a gun. So the most frightening encounters I've had on the planet have always been human situations. And although it might be slightly hairy to be charged by an elephant or, stalked by a lioness or whatever, it's probably down to your own stupidity you're in that situation. Whereas with human conflict, I don't know, it's much less predictable. Humans are much less predictable than wildlife. I'd much rather face a charging elephant than an African child with an AK-47.
Concentrating on animals, though, can you look back, leaving African children with AK-47s aside, looking back, have you found yourself in any very sticky predicaments?
Yeah, I've had a few close calls. I remember one time in Africa we'd been filming the proximity of wildlife and the locals and tourists, and we'd filmed a charming sequence of an elephant moving through a tented camp, luxury tented camp. And the elephant was hoovering up these seeds which have fallen from the acacia trees. Anyway, I got some lovely shots of this elephant tiptoeing over the guy ropes and very carefully squeezing through between two tents. And I remember the sound as its rough skin pushed against the tent. So I thought after the filming, I thought, right, must get some sound of something rubbing against the canvas. So I got the sound recording kit, and basically I was just going to go to the edge of the camp and just run my hand over the edge of the canvas to try and simulate that sound. And as I went round the corner of the last tent, suddenly and I was fiddling around with the sound recording kit, and I had the headphones on, holding the microphone, and out of the corner of my eye I just saw this thing rushing towards me. And I looked up to see that same elephant, this bull elephant, just charging flat out at me. And I had no time to react. And I just looked up, I just stood stock still. And this elephant stopped about 6 feet from me with his ears right out, trumpet, like this great big trumpet. And I remember almost audibly saying, sorry. And I kind of lowered my head and I just backed away behind the tent. And he just shook his head and flapped his ears, and some dust went up. And he was just telling me, just watch out. But I think what was quite nice about that is there was no intent just to flatten me. There was no malicious intent. I probably spooked him as much as he spooked me, and he was just saying, stop, kind of thing. And of course I did. So, but I've had lots of similar encounters to that. But that was my own stupidity, let's be honest.
But the good thing is you're here today in fine fettle, and I'm pleased to see you. Just to finish off, Gavin, there might be people listening to us speaking today on this Emirates flight who might be thinking to themselves, do you know what, I'd really like to do what Gavin has done. It sounds like a brilliant life, going out there with cameras, shooting beautiful wildlife scenes. What advice would you give to young people now wanting to follow in your footsteps?
I think if you have a passion for wildlife and you have a passion for for photography, then it doesn't matter where you live on this planet, well, unless you're in Antarctica, but it doesn't matter where you live. I mean, just outside the hotel here in Dubai, there are birds. I saw a wood hooper at breakfast this morning, which are very rare to see in the UK. Epops, it's one of the few Latin names I can remember. I think if you want to do a career like mine, get out there and spend time with your camera, with the wildlife. And even if you're not necessarily filming it, watch the wildlife, watch the birds, watch the mammals, see how they behave, see what they do. And the whole time you're observing, you will learn, like a naturalist would have done in Victorian times. And if you haven't got a camera, go out and make notes of what they do. Make notes of their habits and the times they're active, all that kind of stuff. That will stand you in very good stead, for if you then want to approach a film company to take you on.
Of course, everyone's got a camera in their pocket today.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what you can do with, an iPhone or a Samsung or whatever you might have. I've got one here. I mean, that is almost like my pocket camera because I've always got the phone on me. You can do slow motion. It's got 3 lenses on it. I mean, it's crazy, really, that what you can shoot with a phone now is, the quality of TV from maybe 15 years ago. Something that would have taken, cost you 70 grand or something.
Gavin, it's been brilliant talking to you. I've learned
Likewise.
a lot. I hope people watching us on this Emirates flight have learned a lot. And thank you for finally producing this excellent book. Just a reminder, it's called Journeys in the Wild, subtitled The Secret Life of a Cameraman. It's got a foreword by Sir David Attenborough, which is just brilliant, and it's a really worthwhile read. So thank you very much for joining us today. Really enjoyed talking to you.
Well, no, thank you very much for your time.
It's been brilliant.
And
Thanks.
safe travels to everybody watching.